Hello everyone, this is Nick with WXPR Public Radio. In this video, we're going to look at editing audio in depth, working with all the tools, and getting ready to make a final audio file for exporting. Okay, I have a new Audacity project here, and we did a quick tour last time, but let's just go through and talk about the layout as is default in Audacity. We have our menus here. File is going to be where you save your project, name your project. You can export and import files. You're not going to use edit too much, but a lot of the options in here are also available as shortcuts up here. Select will give you some options for choosing a lot of tracks, clipping boundaries. Again, most of the ones you're going to use are already as a shortcut. You may want to look in the view area a little bit. There's options to turn off or turn on toolbars. For now, we're going to stick with the default ones. There's some history options, skipping options, and some zoom options, which again are also in the shortcut menu. Your transport is talking about your transport bar, playing, recording, stopping. There are a couple extra features in here. One notable is you can set a timer record. I've used that a couple of times. You can jump your cursor around. And also keep in mind when you're seeing all these, the keyboard shortcut is shown next to each of these commands. The tracks menu is helpful. You can add a new track within here. You could add all of your tracks and then just start using them from there. You can change some of your tracks in terms of mixing. You can mix stereo down to mono. If you had a stereo microphone that you forgot to record in mono version, this would be the command you could use to mix that down and average the two into one mono file. Generate, you're probably not going to need too much for voice work, but there's a lot you can do with this stuff. For example, a tone. I can generate a 440 hertz tone with an amplitude of 0.8 in the linear scale, and I hit OK, and it creates a tone. There's a lot of stuff you can generate. Generally, it's not going to be needed in what we're doing. We are going to go into effects, but we're not going to do that right now. There is a lot you can do in here. A lot of it you can do for music production. There are a couple things that is highly recommended for voiceover work. Analyzing kind of comes back to the effects area. We're not going to really use that. Something that might be helpful is the fine clipping tool. If you're having, let's say you recorded pretty close to 0, but you're not sure if you ever clipped, this would change the color of some of it. So it's a little easier to find, and you could kind of fine-tune that and bring that clipping down. Tools, there's a lot of plugins, extra plugins. You can create macros. We're not going to really go into much of this. And the help menu, I do recommend checking out the quick help and the manual. There's a lot in there that I'm going over, and there's a lot there I'm not going over, but this is a great resource. Okay, we have our transport toolbar here. We have pause, play, stop, skip to beginning, skip to end, and record. We talked briefly about the pause button earlier, and let's just quickly show what that could be used for. Let's say I'm recording at home, and my dog starts barking. If I hit stop, it's going to stop the recording, which is fine. And then I could hit record and continue on. If I didn't want to stop the recording, if I just wanted to talk to my dog for a couple seconds to tell her to be quiet, I could just hit pause. That will pause the recording where it was, and then I can unpause it and continue the recording. Again, not really much different than stopping it and then just left clicking the record button, but it's an option. All right, I'm going to skip over the toolbar for now because we're going to go into depth on how to use these. This is really the heart of editing your audio. Okay, we did talk about the input meters and the output meters, or the microphone and playback. But One of the great things with this is we can check out our levels before even hitting the record button. This says click to start monitoring. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And now if I pull my USB microphone closer to my mouth, I can see that my levels are changing. I'm going to put it back down, and now it's a lot quieter. That's great to fine-tune your microphone before you start recording. Either way is fine, but this is an option. We're going to jump over here into our microphone and playback volume. So for your microphone, and this is going to depend on what kind of microphone you have. In my case, I have an input level on my device, but I also have an input level right here in Audacity. So I could bring that way down, and I haven't touched my microphone, but that has changed the input level on my microphone. And I can bring that way up. And even though I'm 1.5 feet away from my microphone, it is peaking out, which is not what we want. So in this situation, if I bring my microphone about 6 inches away from my face as a starting point, I can play with this input volume, this recording volume. Okay, I want a little bit more than that, a little bit more, too much, and we'll look at it right there. So that's a great level. I'm getting close to 0, maybe just a little bit too close, depends on how energetic my voice is, but this is a great level to work with. Generally, the closer you can get to 0 without reaching 0, the best audio you will have for later editing. Okay, let's move on to our shortcuts. I also want to point out, I talked about in the last video, you hover over a button, it will say what it is and the keyboard shortcut. All right, we have a cut, copy, paste, trim to the selection, or they say trim audio outside selection, which means if I select this audio, and I click this button, anything outside of this selection will disappear. Now, it's not gone for good. We can always go to Edit, and then Undo, Trim Audio, and it's back. Until you save and close the Audacity project, those undo and redo options in your history will be available. Let's check the next one. So if let's say this was something I said incorrectly and I did not want this, I can do silence audio selection or remove the audio within the selection. Now you can see it didn't create a blank space. All it did was silence it. So that there's still time of infinitely quiet volume right here. Here is our undo and redo option. So I can undo that trim. Zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom out. And this is when you have a selection. So let's say I just want to see this audio here. I can click on the Fit Selection to Width button, and it'll zoom into that selection and fill the screen with it. Alternatively, I can fit Project to Width, so the longest audio in your project will fit the width of your screen, which in this case is just 27 seconds of the first track. Zoom toggle allows you to zoom in really far right where your cursor is, so you can work in minute detail on a specific piece of the waveform. So if we click that, here are actually the individual samples of the audio. We're not going to go into that right now. It's not that important, but just be aware that that's what that button does. This is the transcription tool. You could take an interview and import it into a track, and you could slow down the playback speed while you're typing the interview for a news release. All right, we already talked about the audio hardware settings, which are available here. They are also available in Edit, Preferences, and then Devices. Pretty similar information here. We have our time bar up here. which will also allow me to move my playback cursor. And by default, if you click in here, it will start playback right there. I can move that cursor by clicking within a track as well. Let's take a look at the track options here. There's some menus within this audio track button. We're going to come back to that. The first one is mute and solo. Let's just take this audio and we're going to go to tracks, add new mono track, and then we'll add one more. And we're going to skip to the beginning to move our cursor back to the beginning. And I'm just going to paste that. Alternatively, instead of Control V on the keyboard, I can use the paste button right here, which is a clipboard icon. All right, we have 3 tracks, same audio, but there is audio. That's the main thing. If I click on solo, that means the track that is solo will be the only one that will play back. You can only have one track in the solo mode. So if I click solo here, this becomes muted and this becomes solo. Similarly, the third one, that is solo, the other 2 are muted. Now, if I click solo again, everything becomes unmuted, nothing is checked as solo. If you want to listen to 2 tracks, but not the third one in this case, you can mute that third track. Or if I only wanted listen to the second one, I can mute the top track as well. Mute, there are you can have multiple tracks muted, you can have multiple tracks unmuted, but you can only have one track soloed. Here is our track gain. This affects the volume in the track, but does not alter the audio itself. You are not altering the volume of the audio. So I can turn my gain up to +14, solo that track, and we'll see on this playback meter that it is quite loud. So it's louder than I recorded. If I bump that up even more, we are now peaking, and the audio is not going to be any good. But we did not alter the audio, therefore the height of the waveform or the amplitude of the waveform is not changed. All right, we're going to go ahead and stop that, bring this back to 0. The left and right is your pan. This would be your left speaker, your right speaker. Really no use to us. If you're mixing music, you may want, let's say, the drums in the left speaker and guitar on the right speaker. You could easily do that within the track. We have a description of our track properties. This is saying the track is mono, not stereo. The sample rate is 44,100 hertz. And we are 32-bit float. And that's not really important right now. Just know that these are the default settings for Audacity, and these are perfectly acceptable and not necessarily what we want to export as, but when we are editing audio, this is a great start. If we want to minimize a track, there's this little up arrow. Now I'll kind of hide it, and we can bring it back down. If we want to select all the audio in a track, we can press the select button. All right, let's return to those hidden audio track options. So we're going to click on audio track, and there's a little down arrow next to it to let you know that it's a menu. Here we can change the name of each track individually. So I'm going to click on name. In this case, let's just call it track 1. That audio track text is now changed to track 1. We can move the track down, we can move it up, bottom, top. Those are all quick ways to move tracks around. You can also do that by grabbing some of the blank space within the track, left click, hold, and you can move your track around. Okay, let's just take a quick look here. And the default way Audacity shows the waveform is in a waveform linear scale. Without going into too much detail, what that means is a 1.0 is the same as 0 decibels full scale. So a 1 here is the same as 0 up here. 0.5 is the same as minus 6 decibels on the full scale. And 0 would be infinitely quiet. I am used to working in waveform decibel scale, which will also represent what you are seeing in the meters up here. Spectrogram is also an option, really not that helpful unless you are trying to look at the audio in a different way. So let's just take a quick look at the difference between the waveform linear scale and the waveform decibel scale. I'm going to unsolo this track, which will unmute everything. And these are the exact same pieces of audio. They are being represented differently. We can see our decibels here, minus 20, 30, 40, 50. I'm going to assume that little tick is minus 10. And this is a great way to kind of see your waveform bigger. For now, we're just going to leave it on the default of waveform linear. Okay, let's take a look at the bottom, and that will conclude our little tour. Our project rate, so the Audacity project by default, is 44,100 hertz. The easiest way to understand what this means is this is the same project rate that CDs are recorded at. So if you want CD quality audio, that is a great project rate to have. Video and DVD, the standardized project rate is 48,000. You can change that here, but for us, 44,100 is what we want. Our next option here is the Snap to menu. And when I have this off, now I'm zoomed very far in here, within milliseconds. So I have kind of an infinite option for what I want to select. Now if I turn the Snap to nearest on, you can see now it's snapped to 29.99. And if I try and go in between 29.89 and the next tick, it will not let me choose that. So this is what snapping does. And unless you're working with music or you're standardizing it all to a specific tempo, this isn't necessarily helpful. We're going to turn that back off. Our audio position is going to show where our cursor is in relation to time. So if I click near 40, we can see here I did not click on 40. I clicked on 39 seconds, 986 thousandths of a second. That's just a good way to kind of keep track of where different spots are. I could say that my audio right here ends at around 28 or 29 seconds. So that just gives you a good reference other than the time scale at the top. Also is the selection options here. So if we scroll back beginning here, and I'm going to select around 10 and go to around 15. And we see that reflected here. We have almost 10 seconds and close to 15 seconds. You can change that a little bit here. Start in length, so start in duration. This is a 5 second and 224 thousandth of a second selection. There's a couple things here. May or may not be helpful, but know it's there. Going back to the audio position or where your cursor is, keep in mind that there's a little menu here with the down arrow that you can change that. You can look at frames of video. You can change how you want your time to be represented, you can just change it to seconds. Okay, we have pretty much gone through everything available except for the tools. And these tools are going to be the heart of how you're going to edit audio. Let's get rid of these tracks. I'm just hitting the X button at the top left to get rid of them. And let's go ahead and start a new recording with a good level. So I'm going to click on monitoring, and I'm going to check. I'm listening. I'm pop, pop, pop. Make sure I'm not blowing on the microphone too much. I do have a pop filter installed. So if you do not have a pop filter, make sure you are not talking directly in your microphone, but put it off to the side. Just about 45 degrees is a good option, so that air coming out of your mouth isn't going directly into the microphone, but your microphone is still pointing at your mouth. That's important. You don't want your microphone directly to the left, right, top, or bottom of your mouth, because the microphone isn't picking up the sound waves coming from your mouth. So about 45 degrees is a good compromise between popping and good audio. So I have today's forecast, and I'm going to go ahead and hit my record button. I'm checking my levels one more time. I'm around -6. That is perfect. And let's see what the weather is. The forecast for today is partly sunny with a high near 37 degrees. This evening, mostly cloudy, then gradually becoming mostly clear with a low around 17. Okay, we have some audio. I'm going to go ahead and hit the stop button. And let's say I was going to use this audio. I don't want my audio at the end. I don't want my audio at the beginning. I just want the good stuff, which is right here. I'm going to left click hold with my cursor, drag it over, release, and go to my shortcuts and trim audio outside of the selection. And there is my clean audio. That's all I want. Now, how do we move this audio to the beginning? Let's look at our tools. We have the selection tool, which I've been calling a cursor because it kind of looks like a cursor. The envelope tool, which is used for adjusting volume over time. The draw tool, which allows you to move individual samples, their amplitude, but really not that helpful for us. The zoom tool. The time shift tool, which I may call the move tool. And then the multi-tool, which combines all of those into one button and one tool. Let's start using them separately so you can see what they do. We know how to use the selection tool that selects audio, moves your cursor, and in conjunction with other buttons and shortcuts can do a lot and is very important. But going back to moving audio, this move tool, or what they call the time shift tool, I'm going to left click that. It's now darker. I can then take this clip, left click and hold, and move it wherever I want, or even before 0 seconds. Now, if you lightly move it to the 0 mark, it will snap into place and there will be a yellow line. That means the beginning of your clip is lined up with the 0 second marker, which is what we want. Okay, we have that moved. Now, let's just say I don't like this audio right here. Maybe I said maybe I coughed, but let's get rid of it. We're going to take our selection tool, left click to activate it. I'm going to select that audio, and I could use the silence audio selection tool to get rid of it, and that would do this and leave that time. But I don't want a big gap where I coughed and it's going to separate my sentence. So I'm going to hit Control Z on the keyboard, or you can use this back arrow on the shortcut bar. So what are we going to do? We could highlight it and hit backspace, which is a great option. I'm going to undo that. I'm just going to show you a couple of other options that are kind of hidden. If we go to the Edit menu, we have our Delete, which is Control K, which does the same thing as backspace. We have a Cut option. So let's say I had a sentence that I said out of order and I wanted to move it later. I have now cut that audio, and I'm going to go to the 10-second mark, and I could go to Edit, Paste, or the clipboard here on the shortcut, or Control V on the keyboard. And now I pasted it there. Let's go back. We're also going to look at Edit and Remove Special. There's a couple options. You can split cut, split delete, silence it, or trim it. So if we wanted to split delete, that leaves that gap in place. So let's say we had a couple pieces over here that we had them at the proper time. And if I highlight this and hit delete, all of those clips get shifted. And Control Z. So we have these placed where we want them, but we don't want this bit of audio here. That would be this Remove Special, Split, Delete. Will not move the other audio. And we could remember that an easy way of doing that. So what Audacity has as the keyboard shortcut for delete is Control and K, which you could maybe remember as K for cut. I don't know, but let's put it back in there. If we hold Control and Alt on Windows and hit K, that does the same thing. So Control K will delete and shift. Control Alt K will delete and keep everything where it was. That is pretty powerful. Now there's something that we have not gone over that really should be the first thing you do when you start a new project. That is File, Save Project, or Control S. There's a warning that will pop up that says Save Project is for an Audacity project, not an audio file. For an audio file that will open in other applications, use Export. And what that means is this is still audio, but it's not a WAV file, it's not an MP3, it's a .aup, which can only be opened in Audacity. If you don't want this to show up again, go ahead and check that box. Alright, by default there will be a Audacity folder, which will be housed under your Documents folder, which is fine for me. And we'll just call this Testing. Alright, that renamed at the top left, our project is called Testing. And let's say we delete this, Control Alt K, because I don't want to move my other files. And we've made a change. I'm going to hit Control S for save. Now it didn't confirm that I saved it, but we can also do that by going up to File, Save Project, and Save. But we see that it's grayed out, which means there have been no changes since the last time I saved, which is confirmation that my Control S did work. Okay, let's take a look at the other tools here. I'm going to Control Z or click this undo button a couple times. Oops, a little too far. So we're going to hit redo to move forward in the history. Okay, I have my original audio here. And let's take a look at the envelope tool. Now we can see on this audio here and also here, the audio is a little bit quieter than normal. if you have a tendency to kind of peter out at the end of your sentences, the envelope tool is going to allow you to fix that. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And what I'm doing is I'm holding Control on my keyboard and using the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. We can also zoom in and out with the minus and plus icon here. Or we can grab the zoom tool, left click will zoom in, right click will zoom out. Left click and hold a selection will create that selection and move it to the edges, which is the same as the fit selection to width shortcut. I prefer to not use the zoom tool and to do everything with my mouse wheel. To move left and right though, at the bottom there is a bar and you do have to use that. Okay, so the envelope tool. When we have that active, you can see that there's a gray area up here and also a blue area at the top. That blue area is your maximum volume, which by default would be on the linear scale 1, which is totally fine. If I left click once on that blue line and let go, we now have 1, 2, 3, 4 white dots on those edges. I'm going to left click over here as well, and now we made 4 more. You can left click and hold to make a point and to move it. And what that's doing is it is changing the volume over time. So the volume here is quieter than the volume here. Alternatively, we could grab that white dot and make it louder. And Audacity will change the representation of the waveform to show that adjustment. If you want to remove a white dot, you can left click hold on it and move it up or down, depending on which side you grab it, off of the track, and it let go and it will disappear. So let's remove this one as well. And either way works. You can go up or down as long as it is off the track. All right, so let's say right here, I kind of petered out. And we're going to left click, and you can see because I didn't grab it right at the top or right on the change in time, it moved it a little bit. So usually, if you don't want to change the audio there, clicking on the blue line might be the easiest option. You can try clicking between these gray areas, but I end up moving it a little bit, which is fine. All right, we want this to be louder. So I'm going to left click hold this, and I'm going to move it up. And you can see as I move it left to right, or over time, what part of the waveform gets louder. And that looks okay right there. So I'm going to move back to the selection tool. I'm going to play it back. And we can kind of see on the playback meter that it's pretty uniform. It's all around -12. A little jump at the beginning towards -6. But that's pretty uniform. If we undo that change, yeah, it kind of drops down to -18 towards the end. So that's a great way to adjust your volume over time for certain sentences and maybe for music. I'm going to suggest that if you want to fade a song out, we're going to move to our selection tool and we're going to take this sentence here. And I could get the envelope tool and make those adjustments down. But if I do that, I kind of have to do it like that, because if I just have 2, Audacity will sometimes make the volume change non-linearly, which is fine, but you can see here there's kind of a swoop in the volume. I like my fade outs to be linear. So I'm going to go back to my original here, grab my selection tool, make my selection, and I'm going to go to Effect and Fade Out. All right, I'm going to undo that. And we can take a quick look at the draw tool, but like I said, it's not really helpful. I've zoomed way, way in, and I can see each of these samples. And I can change the amplitude of each of these samples. Now, the point where this might be helpful is, for example, here. I had a kind of a spike that I could manually drop down. Or let's say you accidentally dropped your phone on the table and your microphone picked it up and it was a very, very quick noise. Or you touched your microphone, anything that's very, very quick, you could edit by adjusting the samples. But the better your original audio is, the less editing you have to do, and the better the finished audio is going to be. We looked at the zoom tool, we looked at the move tool, we looked at the envelope tool, and the selection tool. The multi-tool combines all of those. If I hover over the change in gray or the blue, it shows that the envelope tool is active, and I can make those changes. If I zoom out a little bit more and hold the control key on my keyboard, you can see that the time shift tool is active, and I can move my clip. Without holding anything and hovering towards the middle, my selection tool is active. If I right-click, it will zoom out, and you can't see it because it's so fast, but the zoom tool is active at that point. However, there is no zoom in option, but we have this shortcut here of fit project to width, and if I left-click that, my project is back to the width of my screen. I really suggest looking through the manual at some of these shortcuts and find out what works for you, because there's a lot more in there that I do not use and I haven't talked about. Okay, we've gone in depth on all the toolbars and the tools. Now would be the time to record something on your computer and play around with the different tools. Try first by selecting each tool individually so you can really get a feel for how they work. And then maybe try out the multi-tool and see if using that will speed up your process. In the next video, we're going to look at working with multiple tracks and really starting to put our project together.